We'll give it just another minute as I see quite a few folks joining right at 12:30. So let me give them just a second to get in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. It looks like the most of the attendees have joined. Thank you everyone so much for joining us for our first webinar of the year. We are recording this session, but we'll go ahead and dive right into the presentation. So this is the professional judgments, a way to compliance and student success. It's brought to you by our lovely round of panelists. So we have Lisa Williams, who is the Director of Financial Aid at John Paul the Great Catholic University. Lisa has been in financial aid for over 10 years, starting when her school was first approved for federal funding. Through now, they have over 300 students enrolled. Lisa, with the help of FA Solutions, we do part of her processing, manages the federal aid, the state grants, VA benefits, institutional scholarships, and all other things related financial aid at her institution. Thank you for joining us. We also have Rachel Gordon, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Educational Compliance Management. Rachel's been in the field for over 20 years and has experience in both financial aid, admissions, and registrar services. She's held positions such as the Director of Financial Aid and Data Management, along with being the Director of University Financial Aid and Client Services before joining ECM. Her expertise is in the creation of efficient enrollment management process flows, full cycle accreditation and compliance, and is best known for her customer service driven approach. We also have with us Nicole Stark. She is FA Processing Specialist for Stratford University. She's been in financial aid for over 15 years, started out in customer service positions as a student account representative, but since that time has worn several different hats in the financial aid arena over the years and loves sharing her knowledge and expertise with others, specifically those just starting out in financial aid. And then I am your moderator for this event. I'm Bridget McGuire. I'm the Vice President of Operations for FA Solutions. I've been in financial aid for 25 years. I've worked with both large for-profits, small non-for-profits, and everything in between. My current responsibilities are managing the day-to-day operations for FA Solutions and the almost 200 colleges across the country that we work with in all various aspects of financial aid and customer service. And if I can get my slide to move, we will move next. So this webinar is presented by both FA Solutions, which is the role that I serve, and ECM, which is Rachel with Educational Compliance Management. We are sister companies. We both specialize in financial aid processing and support and the various aspects associated with it. Just to get started and make sure that we're all on the same page, and the topic is professional judgment, a way to compliance and student success. We'll talk with both panelists and we'll go over compliance expertise. I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page first when it came to what professional judgment is. So to kick off the session, I want to talk first about that. So professional judgment is where the Higher Education Act allows the authority for financial aid administrators to exercise discretion in several areas. At a high level, it gives the school the right to review an individual student's unique situation that doesn't fit into the traditional process and make adjustments if warranted. What we're going to do in this presentation is talk about some best practices and go through the compliance associated with professional judgments in more detail as we move forward. I wanted to first start by hearing from our panelists. So Lisa, if you could let me share with kind of the group, how do you promote professional judgments on your campus?
Sure. So we try to work with all of the offices and have a very integrated approach. So we've given basically the bare bones definitions of what a professional judgment is, the typical situations that would arise that causes the need for one to both our admissions office as well as to our student life team. So that they're the ones that are usually most on the front lines in dealing with students when there's individual issues. And can work with them, both getting them on campus and then keeping them here once they arrive. So they're prepped in very basic terms on when that might be necessary. We do have a handout for when students are struggling financially on some things that might be of use for them. Some of the things that professional judgment is the one that we list right off the bat, but we also have our institutional scholarship appeal process on there. Information on finding private scholarships, as well as the additional unsubsidized loan if the student is denied for, their parent is denied for PLUS loan, or if their parent is unable to repay and we're able to do a professional judgment in that circumstance. So we try to work together with the other offices by giving them the information they need to know when to send students to us, so that we can provide the more detailed information and then collect the documentation and process on our side.
Good. I like hearing that it's a whole school procedure. Everybody is at least aware of it, even if they're not the decision makers. I think that's very helpful to make sure that, you know, regardless of what department they wind up in expressing their concern, somebody's aware that there might be an opportunity out there and then can pass on the information.
Right. That's our goal.
Yeah. Nicole, is there anything different that your school does or something additional that you'd like to add with how Stratford shares and promotes professional judgments?
Well, I really like what Lisa said about getting, you know, the other departments involved. It really, you know, it really starts with admissions. They're the first line, the first people that the students talk to, and building a rapport with the students is extremely important so that you can kind of get their backstory, their background, and kind of know, you know, what they're going on, you know, what's going on in their lives. And then admissions handing off to student accounts or to financial aid, letting us know if the student has a special circumstance that they've been talking about, so that when financial aid team, you know, meets with the student, they can really understand their situation and really just, you know, try to see if there is a way that professional judgment might work for that student. So I really believe it is about the communication aspect and, but, you know, departments working together to understand a student's, you know, special situation.
Absolutely. I appreciate that aspect. And then let's talk a little bit about the interaction or the benefits, I guess, of a professional judgment. So Nicole, what would you say you have found the biggest benefit to be in having that ability to do a professional judgment to help a student?
It really is a wonderful thing that I've been able to do that over my years of working in the financial aid world. I think one of the main things I can remember of helping students with professional judgment is dependency override. It seems from the areas that I worked in, there were a lot of students who would normally be considered dependent, but they had special circumstances with their family life. You know, they may have one parent incarcerated. They may not be in touch with their parents. And it's usually a matter of really talking to the student to find out, you know, we always ask a student, who's your cheerleader? You know, who is excited for you to be at school and to start your life off this way? And you can really find out a lot by their answer. You know, we'll have students that say, you know, my parents aren't involved in my life. I come from an abusive household even. And those students really stick out in my mind because we've really been able to help a lot of students that way, getting that information and then having, you know, corroboration from their family or other friends or, you know, youth ministers, you know, counselors even, to back that up and let us know, yes, this student has really had a hard life, a special circumstance. So
yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that suggestion of who's, you know, who's your cheerleader, who's in your corner to kind of start the dialogue in a more positive aspect, but it could lead to opening the door to other conversations. Yeah. And Lisa, is there anything additional you'd like to add about the benefits of professional judgments?
I think that Nicole hit it on the head, really, with being able to help those individual students that are in a really tough situation. I know there's been a number of students that probably would not have been able to continue attending at our institution, and we saw them through graduation. So especially the students that have the really difficult situations, it's very gratifying to see them get through to the finish line. And that wouldn't have happened without the help of the professional judgments.
Sometimes it's the way to make it a little bit more affordable by making adjustments for those unique situations, most definitely.
Yeah, and in some cases, it is also putting students in a better situation than they would have been. So they were willing to take on the loans and the debt to make it happen anyway. But the professional judgment maybe put it a little closer to where it should be from a debt to income ratio when they're graduating from school. So
absolutely, absolutely. And Rachel, before we move into the regulatory and compliance aspect, is there anything that you wanted to add from your experience to either of the questions?
I honestly think professional judgment is an authority that we need to share with the campus. We need to allow them to know that we have the ability to service and help students. They might not be able to make the data element changes. That authority only rests with the people within the financial aid office, but anybody can be the steward to bring the student there.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Well, with that, let's dive into your favorite subject, Rachel, and talk about compliance.
Anybody who knows we love compliance at ECM. Thank you so much, Bridget. So now let's talk about who can actually make a professional judgment. The authority to perform professional judgments lies solely with the financial aid administrator listed on the PPA, Program Participation Agreement, also known as the ECAR. This might be your director of financial aid, your financial aid coordinator, your vice president. Regardless of the title, the person whose name is on the ECAR is the person who has been granted the statutory authority to perform the professional judgment. The responsible individual can delegate authority to perform PJs to members of the staff under their direction. This is enormously common, and I highly recommend for schools to outline this in your policies and procedures. State that the director, or whomever might be on the ECAR, has shared this information, that they have said, I give the authority to my staff to perform the professional judgments. Professional judgment authority cannot be delegated to a person outside the direct authority of the financial aid administrator who is listed on the ECAR. Now, this touches on what we just said. Professional judgment is a campus-wide discussion. It is so important to educate everyone who has a touch point with the students that we have this authority as financial aid administrators, whether it's been delegated to us from the person on the ECAR or if we are that person. Someone from admissions can bring the individual student into our office, their academic advisor, even the bursar, but they themselves cannot make the data element changes. Financial aid is like a web. We touch every aspect of the school, but we don't touch every student. The student might not have even applied for financial aid or known that they might be otherwise eligible. It is so important to share this information campus, university, college-wide, but then the individual responsible has to be the financial aid administrator. Regardless of who performs the PJ, it must be made on an individual student by student basis and never across the board for a group or category of students. I actually find this question in my inbox more frequently than you'd imagine, because schools will say to me, Rachel, we have a standardized form. Is that acceptable? And the answer is yes. You can have a form where you're asking questions to the students, but you need to treat each student as an individual. Each case you need to be reading. You might have Joe and Sally who are brother and sister. The same thing happened to one of their parents that has a familial effect, but each student has a different EFC. Each student has a different case and a different story, and you need to treat them as such. If you ignore everything else that we say today, listen to this slide. Document, document, documents. We all saw the letter that came down from the department at the end of 2021, reminding us that there has been a large uptick in professional judgments because we're currently under a national pandemic. With that said, document. It is being cited highly in program reviews, schools that have performed professional judgments without appropriate documentation. The financial aid administrator's professional judgment authority extends to requesting and utilizing any additional information they feel necessary for making an informed decision based on the information provided by the individual student. The special circumstances as presented by the student that leads to the request for professional judgment by a student or family, as well as the review completed by the financial aid administrator, must be fully documented, and all documentation must be maintained in the student's file. If the financial aid administrator decides a professional judgment is not required, all documentation is still required to be maintained in the student's file. I think that last part is one of the most important things that we're touching upon. We try, but we can never guarantee that the adjustment we make or the review will make a difference in a student's aid package. We give them our all. We ask them for all the pieces of documentation. We hope they supply them. We know they always don't, but we always hope it'll come in. It might not make a change. Their EFC might move slightly or not at all, but you still must document it all and document the outcome and the why. Now we're going to get into what I call the weeds, the data element changes, what we're actually physically changing. So let's talk about different types of professional judgment to make this simpler. The first being divorce or separation. This one's pretty clean cut. You're divorced or you're not, you're separated or you're not. You have documentation provided for this. A copy of the divorce agreement. It could be from the lawyer, from the state, whatever the case might be, it's easily obtainable. Death of a parent or spouse. This is such a delicate topic. I always suggest being enormously thoughtful. You as the financial aid administrator will probably be the last person to find this out. The first person will be their educator or professor, possibly a dean or academic advisor. That's why it's so important to share with the rest of the campus what we have the authority to do through professional judgment. A copy of a death certificate works here. Just be thoughtful in your verbiage and kind to the student. Everything we ask for, we're opening a wound, but remind them that we're there to help them. We're their advocate and we're their ally. Excessive paid medical or dental bills. The really important word here is paid. If you owe the hospital $200,000, although we want to help you, we cannot help you. It is very easy to obtain the documentation that it's been paid. Dental offices, medical offices, hospitals, urgent cares, they can all give you an itemized list. Or even though I'm aging myself with this statement, copies of canceled checks work as well. Unemployment or change in employment income. This we're seeing more and more because of the pandemic. People are underemployed. People are no longer having overtime that they might have had before. We just need documentation from the family as to where the income lies today, possibly information on severance, close of a job, a space where the business might have been closed due to COVID. Parent in college, pretty straightforward on that one. Dependency overrides. Nikki touched on this one before. This is an enormously sticky one. In unusual circumstances, a student who does not meet any of the dependency criteria may still be considered to be independent on the basis of the financial aid administrator's professional judgment. I will say this as the parent of a college-age student. She will say she's independent. I will tell you she's not. I pay for everything. This is for those situations where the parents aren't there, where they don't have parent one or parent two, mom or dad, or whomever the case might be. There might have been abuse, substance abuse, abandonment. This is for the God forbids in life that we never want to see happen, but as a reality, we know they do. Your parents could be incarcerated. They might be in another country and you have no contact with them. There's always someone who knows the situation. It's so important to document here, whether it's a counselor, a religious advisor, a teacher, someone from their community college or high school. There are so many people who have helped this student. It could even just be a police report to document that this happened. This is a reality. Obtain it, work with it, and let's see what we can do to help our students. Cost of attendance adjustments are easy, I like to say, but they still get sticky sometimes. Equipment, supplies, kit costs. If these are included in your costs of attendance, you can't make another adjustment. So if you're in a cosmetology, barbering, trade school, culinary, and you already have a line item for kit, it's there, they're paying you directly. This is if it's something additional. Computer technology. I highly recommend, as part of your policies and procedures, putting a maximum amount and how many times a student can utilize this through their education. Someone doesn't need to go out and buy a gaming computer because they need to make a spreadsheet. We all know that. It would be lovely, but that doesn't mean it needs to be an educational expense. Childcare expenses. Very easy to get copies of documentation from childcare providers. They're more than happy to tell you what you've paid and what you owe. Additional transportation expenses. I used this one a lot back when I worked in New York City. We had students who had to pay tolls to get to the school. We would never make an across the board change to their cost of attendance knowing that they lived in that zone because that's not allowed. But if the student came in, we would ask for a copy of, let's say, their EasyPass receipt, showing us how much that expense was, calculate it out, and then we could use our statutory authority to make a professional judgment based on their additional transportation expenses. Professional exams, if you have to take the OAT, food safety exam, cosmetology, LSAT, any of that, you're absolutely allowed to make a one-time change there. COVID professional judgments. As you've all seen, Biden has recently extended the pandemic for another year until March 2023. If you don't have a copy of that documentation, we are absolutely happy to send it to you at ECM. We have been sending it out to all of our schools. I know Bridget at FA Solutions has it as well. This is pertaining to electronic announcement 3-5-20, which is enormously important and has helped so many of us help our students during this very difficult time. Financial aid administrators have the statutory authority to use professional judgment to make adjustments on a case-by-case basis to the cost of attendance or the data elements used in calculating the EFC to reflect a student's special circumstances. The use of professional judgments where students and/or their families have been affected by COVID-19 is permitted, such as a case where an employer closes for a period of time as a result of COVID-19. In making professional judgment determinations, financial aid administrators must obtain documentation and retain it in each student's file. The documentation must substantiate the reason for any adjustment. Institutions are reminded that regardless of how broadly an event may affect its students' population, professional judgment determinations must be made and documented on a case-by-case basis. A few things here. There's one statement covered everything we talked about today. Case-by-case basis, treating the students as individuals. We're going back to document, document, document. Talking about situations such as a loss of income. We have been given the statutory authority to help our students. We are allowed to be their advocate. We are permitted to make changes based on the documentation they provide for extenuating family circumstances, especially under the COVID-19 protections. Just remember to document. This is so important. We can make so many changes and do so many things to help our students, but there are also areas where professional judgment does not apply. And this is just as important, if not more important, than the changes that we can make. You can never change a student's dependency status from independent to dependent. You cannot create a new category of costs in the cost of attendance. With that said, you can have approved costs in your policies and procedures, such as technology expenses. Just make sure you have them outlined, but you cannot create an all new one because someone comes in and says that they have that expense. You cannot make a bottom line adjustment directly to the EFC. We can change data elements that have an effect on the EFC, but we cannot just change the EFC. We cannot change the federal methodology formula itself or the values in the tables used to create the EFC. We cannot make an otherwise ineligible student eligible for Title IV aid, such as using a professional judgment to waive general student eligibility requirements. There are so many documents we can use to clear a C code. Our audit team checks them daily for schools. Ensuring a student is an eligible student is the foundation of everything we do before we award, originate, or disperse federal funds. If you have any questions, just reach out to us at any time and we're happy to help you. You cannot circumvent the intent of the law or regulations. That's a really important one. Never do that. You cannot circumvent the federal SEOG selection criteria. Include expenses related to post-enrollment activities in a student's cost of attendance, except on a one-time basis for the cost of obtaining a first professional credential for a student in a program requiring professional licensure or certificate. So if you are required to take a test or pay for professional licensure or a certificate to obtain employment, you can include that to the student's cost of attendance. And you cannot, as we have discussed, make any across-the-board changes. Just as we treat each of our students as individual humans, we must treat each of their individual files individually. This slide you should all bookmark. This is every citation, whether it's a regulation, registered notice in the Federal Register, dear colleague letter, electronic announcements. We have all of these linked. It was a lot of fun when IFAP changed to FSA to relook them all up, but we did it. We saved them. We share them with all of our schools. These are all the different places that it shares that we have the statutory authority to perform professional judgments to help our students. You need these when you go through your CPA audits or a program review. If they come back and ask why, here's your why. Okay, and I will turn it back over to Bridget for questions.
Yes, thank you so much for going over the regulatory aspects. And I think what rings out very true in everything you said is document, individual and document are probably the keys. We do have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask the panelists. And please, if you guys have additional questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat. But for Lisa and Nicole, have you ever received a request for a professional judgment that needed to be denied? And if so, how did you handle that?
I can say that there have been several that the initial documents they provided, I did have to deny them and ask for more information. There's one recently I can think of where a student and her spouse had both lost their jobs due to COVID. And some of the documents that she provided to explain what their income was didn't quite match up. They were conflicting. So I had to deny that initial and then re-ask for more information so that I could see that the information wasn't conflicting anymore. And then once we had all the information and it all kind of matched up together, we were able to continue on with it.
Okay, I would agree with that. Yeah, that usually if you're denying it, it's because you need additional information or it didn't meet one of the criteria. Lisa or Rachel, anything additional you want to add about experiences in denying professional judgments?
Yeah, I would say that in all of our documentation, we heavily couch it that any professional judgment isn't guaranteed. So that always helps in the case of when you are delivering a denial. In the cases, there are lots of situations like Nicole was mentioning where the initial documentation, there's either conflicting information or missing documentation, that kind of a thing. So I think of professional judgment more as a process, and we don't necessarily tell them it's denied out front, but we just say we can't process until we receive additional information. There have been a handful of times where there was an actual denial that we determined there wasn't going to be any change in the student's financial aid, that kind of a thing. One example that comes to mind is there was a family that told us that their income had been cut in half. and they were really struggling to get by and that kind of a thing. Once we collected the documentation, though, we discovered that their income was cut from like high 200,000s down to 150,000, something like that. And there wasn't going to be a change in their financial aid. Their EFC was still way too high, even with the reduction in information. So in those types of situations, we just go back and we tell the student there's no change in eligibility, so we're not going to be processing the professional judgment. So
I would agree with that. Yeah, another question from the group. Can you say more about not being able to change a student's status from independent, dependent? Maybe Rachel, that's for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is one of the citations put forth by the Department of Education. They have not given us that authority. We do not have the ability to take a student from independent to dependent. We can, however, make changes on a student's ISAR if they made a mistake and we have documentation, or we can ask the student to go back and make said updates. If, let's say, they forgot how old they were when they filled out their FAFSA, they thought they're married and they're not. They don't actually support their children at all. These are all things that we've all seen, we all know happen, and we can suggest that they go back and make set updates. But we cannot choose ourselves to say this student is a dependent, not an independent student.
I'll jump in with just a couple of things. I know that one case that I've had where a student incorrectly reported that they were in the foster care system after the age of 13. That's happened to us a couple of times where they stated that they were in foster care, but just not after the age of 13. So those kinds of updates will switch a student back to dependent. And then the other thing is just if someone is receiving substantial support, that is something that can be accounted for, even though you're not technically changing them to dependent. It might have a slightly different outcome on their EFC if they're receiving cash support.
Okay, all good things to keep in mind. An additional question: if a parent received unemployment and have to repay it, can you calculate the unemployment received as income, or do you zero it out because the parent has to repay the entire amount? How would you handle that in a PJ situation?
I personally would want to dig deeper into this one to see exactly why the parent has to repay that. Were they truly not employed? Was it a fraudulent report? Exactly what was it? I'd be enormously careful with this professional judgment. I'd be very thoughtful. And I would ask for a larger amount of documentation. If this is a specific situation that you're currently going through, I'm happy to speak with you to discuss it further. But I would absolutely ask for more information and find out the baseline of why it had to be repaid before I would do any professional judgment. And you have the authority to do so. Always remember that. You're able to ask for documents. You're not trying to be the financial aid police here. You're trying to help the student while you're also protecting your school. As long as you communicate that to the student, you're thoughtful in your verbiage, and you let them know that you're doing what you're trying to help them, to be their advocate. This is all part of support to them. They will understand.
Yeah, I would agree. Here's an additional question that I think speaks more to the individual, unique student situation. With COVID being a general reason for unemployment, how can we use that unusual case for unemployment be specific and case by case? How do you document that?
You speak to each student, because each student is individual. Each student has a different story. Each student had a different starting and end point, and each student had different dates.
Yep. I think it's kind of your example about the brother and the sister, right? Same family situation, but it was each student writing their letter to explain the particular, and here would be each student explaining their unemployment situation and when it happened and how much it impacted them. So just it could all be unemployment, but that individual student is the key to that.
I agree. We can't group types of professional judgments together. You have to remember it's always on a case by case basis. Even if they're saying it's the same reason, like COVID, it's still case by case basis.
And the department reminded us in the Gen Ed letter that they put out at the end of last year that each one has to be looked at on an individual case-by-case basis.
Right.
They were very clear with their guidance, and we need to ensure that we're following that.
Yep. Okay, here's an additional question. What if a student's income changed, but the parents' income for that same year changed as well? So the student's income, I think what they're saying is went down, and the parents' income went up. How would you necessarily address that type of situation?
Recalculate the entire family. As we know, they take a larger percentage from the student than they do from the parents. There's lots of variables in an EFC calculation. Absolutely recalculate. Let them know that you've performed the calculation and see if it makes a change that's beneficial to the student.
An additional question just came in. Do any of you first look at the documentation to determine if the professional judgment would make a difference in the eligibility before you determine if you're going to approve it, or do you approve or deny and then do the calculation?
I mean, I would say approval is your last step. You really need all of the documentation. You need to put all the pieces together before you can say yes or no. And that's why we tell, students that it's not a given. It's not a definite thing. We need all this documentation to determine if it's going to work out as a PJ.
Yeah, I would say that the verbiage that we typically use is that they provide the documentation so that we can see if a professional judgment is appropriate. So we're going through and doing we're essentially doing all the work in the calculation, and then the approval would be making a change to the components, and a denial would basically be just keeping the documentation on file that it doesn't make a difference and that we're not going to make the change on their FAFSA.
And I say always review and always attempt the calculation. You don't know if a student might be borderline to Pell, that it might make a great difference, that now you can give them some grant money that you couldn't before. Absolutely take a look, try it, see what happens, and then from there ascertain whether or not it makes a difference. But for me, I have never ignored the actual numbers. I've always attempted the data element changes.
And saw the outcome. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. An additional question. If a parent is also in college, then is the parent counted along with the student in the total number in college? This particular school tells students not to add the parent on the FAFSA, only themselves. I think, Rachel, that was one of the categories you had on the PJ was about parent in college. I think this is referencing that.
Yes, if they're enrolled full-time in school, then you can do it. You need documentation. If you participate in the clearinghouse, it's super easy to check if the other school does as well. If not, a copy of the parent's enrollment would suffice. And then, yes, it would be, let's say it's just, a single family household, it would be 2 and 2.
Excellent. All right. Let's see. And then additional question. This particular school has students who are truly independent. So can we change their status? Example, they're paying all of their rent, their car bill, etc. Not quite sure I follow that question. So if it makes sense, Rachel, feel free.
I'm always cautious when I do a dependency override. I ask for documentation of the situation. There's a reason that the dependent and independent status have been put forth by the department. They review all professional judgments. Let's say it's program review and they're reviewing them. A CPA is looking at them. I always err on the side of caution to take a look. Is the student in a situation where the parent chose not to or could not? Is it something that happened to the student? Or is it that the student's just saying, I can pay for this, so I'm going to choose to, even though my mom is still very involved, maybe mom and dad are even taking a plus loan. So I always look at it in this situation as, has something happened that the family is no longer involved?
Yeah,
sorry. No, please.
I was just going to say, we get this situation a lot where the student, even if they were either previously working and independent, or their parents are not in a situation to financially provide that kind of a thing. We have a lot of students that are from very large families. So if you have a middle income family and taking care of 7 to 10 other children, you don't have a lot of extra cash laying around. However, I do let them know that unless the Department of Education is pretty clear that if the parent is choosing not to provide any support, that's not a reason for a dependency override. It has to be something well beyond that. So in the cases, they still have to provide the documentation. Hopefully the parent's cooperative and we can do the plus waiver if they don't have the ability to repay a plus loan. But just the student, the way that I put it to most students is the IRS and the Department of Education have two completely different definitions of dependency. And for federal aid purposes, we follow the Department of Education. If you're filing taxes, you'll follow the IRS definition. But we're looking at if you're under 24 and not married, then you will almost certainly be a dependent, even if your parents are unable to contribute from their out-of-pocket costs.
Okay. An additional question just came in. What would you do in a situation where a student who is under the age of 24 and is considered independent because they have a child or children, and answer, yes, do you have children you support? The student's parents provide the support though for the grandchild. Would you ask the student to estimate the support and report as cash support on the FAFSA, or would you consider the student to actually be dependent?
I think there's layers to this question, and it comes into also, is the student receiving any form of social services to help pay for the child? Is the student receiving child support that's also helping them pay for the child? What percentage of income might be coming in? So I would take a look at this as a lot grander of a picture. I definitely would be asking more questions to make sure that the outcome that I can come to is most behooving to the student and an accurate picture of where the actual financial situation lies. Because there are so many exterior things that are no longer taken in consideration on the FAFSA, such as the social services aspects of whether or not maybe they're getting WIC, food stamps, Social Security, whatever the case might be, and get some answers to those questions of how the child is truly being supported.
I think it just further, reiterates that each case is unique and you've just got to get that documentation to help make that determination, which kind of supports the next question was again, kind of back to that unemployment. Does unemployment become case by case because they're coming to the school and asking for assistance? And I think you all spoke to that earlier, as it definitely is individual because it's each particular student, when they became unemployed, what the dollar figures are associated with their unemployment, the time frame, the start and end of it. Each of that is student specific. And as long as you're getting student specific documentation, you're abiding by that case by case consideration, even though you might have 7 unemployed students at the same time. Each of their situations are going to have different dates, different amounts, different timeframes. And you're getting unique documents for each student. You're not saying, or you should not be saying rather, any student that's unemployed automatically gets this. You're collecting their documents to confirm their individual situation meets the guidance for case by case. And here's an additional question. How do you document when a student claims that they are estranged from their parents? I think going back to kind of that dependency override, what do you collect to validate that estrangement?
We have always had 3 different statements that we collect. The statement from the student explaining the circumstances, a statement from a professional, whether it be a counselor, a family doctor, a clergy member, somebody in the professional world that knows the situation, and then another friend or family member to write a statement. And all 3 statements need to corroborate the story. So we can't have 3 separate statements that all say something different, because that doesn't equate. It ends up being conflicting.
Yeah, I would say we do the same thing. The difference, typically 3 different statements. We've had a few students submit more than that. We've had a couple of students that weren't able to provide the documentation, and so they were very adamant that it was the situation, but they were not able to provide information from a professional, or they stated that they didn't have any family and friends, they were estranged from all of them, that kind of a thing. So unfortunately, in those types of situations, we usually can't help because we do need the documentation for the protection of our institution. But we do that. I know there was, just to give an example, there was one student that we had, her parents divorced when she was very young. She hadn't seen her dad in a very large, like for most of her life, she hadn't seen her dad. She was living with her mom when she started, but then her mom died, her mom and her stepdad. Her mom died. Her stepdad that had never adopted her was still taking care of her, or still financially contributing, but she couldn't get a hold of her dad, who was her only surviving parent. So in that type of situation, we collected the documentation from the student. She was able to provide the corroboration from her stepfather, in addition to the support that he was providing. And then we also had, I believe it was a pastor that provided corroboration of the story, that she hadn't seen her father since she was very young. So just as a concrete example.
Right, that's a good example. I know we only have a little bit of time left, and I still have quite a few questions. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So can you use different years' income for the student and the parent, or do you need to use the same year income for both when reviewing a PJ?
Same year.
It should be based on the current situation.
And for both of them, not like this person last year had this situation,
right,
and this person this year, same year, same time frame that you're reviewing for both sets. Okay, what is the best way to recalculate taxes paid? So if you're doing a PJ and you're changing income based on new information, what's the best way to recalculate that taxes paid, Rachel?
For me, I use the IRS calculator. That's what I like to take a look at. Different people have used different items, but that's what I always find the most reliable, because it's in a way going to the source. That's how I would traditionally do it. What about you, Lisa and Nikki?
I believe in FAA Access, if you're going in as if you're making an ISR correction, I believe you can initiate that, and there is a taxes paid button that you can click on when you put in the new income. And you don't, if it ends up not working out, you don't have to submit the correction, but you can see what it changes it to.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's there.
All right. In the essence of time, let's move on to the next one. Is it okay to have a PJ policy, to have in your PJ policy certain items you do not consider, such as self-employment changes in income or voluntarily quitting your job?
I personally think as long as you have outlined what you're reviewing, when you're saying quitting your job, you're saying a choice that you've made. But then I might want to say to dig deeper, because that feels like a little bit of a large question. Like, why did you quit your job? Was there also a medical situation going on? Was there some sort of abuse at work? What was actually occurring that led to that specific instance? So I would be a little bit cautious of putting something as obtuse as that in your policy, but you absolutely should be outlining all aspects of what you're going to be looking at when you're considering professional judgment. Whom you're granting the authority to in your office is a key item. If you're giving it to your counselors, assistant associate directors, etc. How you're communicating to the students. What is the process flow that you're going through? Do you have a committee per se? Some schools choose to do that, and have it all documented. I don't think I'd put anything in there saying that I wouldn't review certain cases, because then you're closing out the larger part of the story by only looking at one aspect. Lisa and Nikki, how do the policies at your schools work and pertain to this?
Yeah, I would say that from our school's perspective, we do look at self-employment because that can fluctuate quite a bit.
Mhm.
And I know, especially with the pandemic, there were some students, their dad's a contractor and they're self-employed. And then because of COVID, things shut down and they weren't able to get into people's homes and actually do work. So I think that shutting that door altogether can be very harmful to a large subset of students, or even if a student chose to quit their job, they voluntarily quit because they live 8 hours north and they decided to relocate to come to our institution. There's a lot of variables that you can take a look at that they did voluntarily quit, but at the same time, it would have been hard to attend school without making that change. So it might be something that you can dig into and look at in a little more detail and decide that a particular professional judgment is not appropriate. Even self-employment income, if it's variable, but it's a predictable variability, that kind of a thing would be something to look at on a more individual basis than broad strokes for the whole policy.
Yep. Okay. Do any of you handle professional judgments differently if the person or the parent earned a 6-digit income? And if that person lost their job or started receiving unemployment, the feds are currently recommending that you zero out that income. And they're curious is because their initial income was so high, if you're handling that any differently.
Absolutely not.
I mean, you still have to document,
Mhm.
everything. You still have to get the documentation, even if it's a large amount of money. I mean, it happens though. People lose their jobs all the time.
And I think we need to be really thoughtful. It's not any worse if somebody who's earning a 6-figure job loses their job and now has no income than it is if somebody who had a lower paying job loses their job. Both people now are unemployed.
Right.
Both people are put on the same unemployment. One might be a little bit different than the other, but they're not making 6 figures on unemployment. You can take a look at what their severance package was, if they might have received one. You can always find out what their assets and investments are. But again, we're not the financial aid police. The person has legitimately lost their job. They don't have that 6-figure salary anymore, but they do still have, although the formula doesn't take this into consideration, mortgage, rent, food, utilities, and bills. Those all keep coming in even if you lose your job. Our job is to use our authority to help our students within the statutory authority we are granted. And I treat all students as individuals, but I do not look at what was the starting point. I look at where are we as of today.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
that's what the professional judgment is. As of today, your parent is unemployed.
I think there's still a little bit of debate, Rachel, from the statement about adding a parent in college. So I think
Yes.
clarification about, can they
Absolutely.
add it to the FAFSA, or is it a PJ to add the parent?
I actually pulled up the full citation for everybody when I saw the questions coming in. Yes, you can. It's actually been asked several times on NASFA's website. To be honest, it has over 1,200 views currently. Yes, a financial aid administrator may exercise his or her professional judgment authority to include a parent of a dependent student in a number of college. And the exact reference, which I can put in the comments, is section 479A of the Higher Education Act of 1965, as amended 20 USC 1087 TT. And I do have that bookmarked on my desk because it's come up many times from the hundreds of schools that we work with. And these are one of the thousands of things that we keep at our fingertips all day, Bridget and I.
Yeah, I would jump in and say, just to, hopefully this might clear up some confusion, but the student and parent are always going to exclude the parent in college on the FAFSA when they're completing it. It would only purely be after they provide documentation to the financial aid office that a professional judgment can be made.
100% accurately said. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. All right. I'm going to move on in the essence of time. To get a flurry of questions coming in here. So this isn't necessarily a PJ specific question, but the schools have seen students that answer they are self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. when the school has the conversation, they find out that the parent told the student to do that because they are not going to help the student with paying for college. How would you handle that particular situation?
Have a conversation. Be honest with the student of what the outcome is and what the regulatory requirements are. And really just be thoughtful in the conversation and discuss what the options are and how the FAFSA needs to read, because they are not at risk of being homeless. And we know there are so many students who are, and we want to honor those students and be there to continue to help them.
I would add that then it goes back to that conversation, because if that's the case, let's make sure the parents understand what they aren't agreeing to by filling out a FAFSA and providing that initial information and the options after that. That's where PJ could come in, right? Provide your initial information and then see what the real story is. And if there have to be adjustments at that point, instead of, right, putting in accurate information if they're not really homeless. Additional question, I think, to follow up regarding a deceased parent, is it acceptable to obtain just a copy of like the obituary and or a funeral program, or do you actually need a death certificate?
I have accepted those documents. To be quite honest, it's a really complex situation, and traditionally in an obituary, there's enough information that you can really make a clear and concise answer. And for me, I would accept it. What about you, Bridget?
I've accepted that before too, because if it clearly mentions that what that relationship is and the names match, and that makes sense.
Clear cut.
It is sometimes difficult to request a death certificate because, you know, the whole family doesn't have access to that usually, and it's a touchy situation.
And also things like in New York State, you only get a certain amount and have to pay for anything additional. So then you're putting an undue financial hardship onto the student and the family, which you always want to prevent.
No, we've also had a situation where the parent did not want the student to know the cause of death of another parent. And so that was a professional judgment situation, but I imagine it could potentially come up there as well. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Really good one.
Another question, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but could you go into a little more detail regarding making a change from independent to dependent? They recall a situation where a student was only independent because they were married, and they informed the office that they were now divorced. Well, how would you handle that?
They were married as of the day they filed the FAFSA. And that's how I would handle that.
So I think they're asking, would you do a PJ because they are now divorced and make them dependent? Which we already talked about. You can't make somebody.
Well, you can't make, you can't make somebody dependent. They'd now be considered divorced, and they were married as of the day when they filed the FAFSA, which makes them independent, because that's how that question reads.
Right, you can be separated.
So I always told people, if you're engaged, wait to file that FAFSA until after the wedding day, because you will be now an independent student. But with that said, as of the day they filed the FAFSA, they were married. They would now be considered divorced. It would not make them dependent. They would still be an independent student.
Right. And this question kind of relates back to what we were talking about dependency overrides and what kind of documentation. So if the student can't provide a statement from some sort of a professional counselor, police, clergy, what else have you guys collected in replace of that?
Teachers. There might have been teachers that they spoke with, guidance counselors, someone when they were going to school, a coach I've even accepted from, a coach who might have witnessed the abuse or even had heard from the student what was going on. These are all people who have close relationships and have some sort of a way in which they can tell the story to us so that we know it's true.
Supervisors at their job.
Oh, good one.
Situation as well. So there's somebody that they're talking to, hopefully. I think very rare that there would be nobody else that could collaborate their story.
I once had a former babysitter of someone who corroborated that they were abused, that they had witnessed it.
Yep, it's all about those conversations. I think this might be the last question we'll be able to get to. So the other ones will try to answer either offline or when we send out the presentation, we can provide some of the answers to those. So as the last question, let's see, what question was I at? If a parent had a reduction in income, but not the student, do you request the student's income for that same year then? So if we're making an adjustment and parent lost their job this year, FAFSA is based on prior, would you also then ask the student for their taxes for this year?
I mean, I don't think you have to. You know, we've had a student in that situation. The student's income stayed the same, but the parents drastically decreased. So we asked for the most recent information for the parent.
Yeah, I would agree that most of our situations, the student, they don't mention any change in students' information. So usually we don't even request that documentation.
Mhm.
It's just the parents' information. But if they do mention that there was a change, then we collect the same year from both parties.
And this goes back to treating each student as an individual. Every single one's going to be different.
Right.
Yep. Every single one. So I appreciate everybody's time in joining us. We, FA Solutions and Educational Compliance Management, ECM, we are happy to help. If you have additional PJ questions or any financial aid topic, feel free to reach out now or at any point in the future. We are definitely very flexible and like to tailor our expertise to help, much like a PJ, each unique school, each unique situation. That's kind of the beauty of both of our companies, is that between what we offer, we can be very flexible and have compliant offers to meet whatever your needs are. So appreciate you all joining. Some really good questions today. Thank you so much, and hope you all have an excellent week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.